Hey everyone, it is straight up 6:01, Wednesday, August 19th, 2020, and you are looking live at the face of Pastor Tim, coming to you live from Community of Grace, or you're watching this on tape delay. And we're so glad to have you with us. It is our Wednesday night Bible study, and just to kind of fill you in on why we're doing what we're doing right now, we are toying with the idea, when we finally get back into the building, of doing a 1-hour worship service in 2 parts. The first part we call Grace Worship. We'll all be together, all ages, kids, adults. We'll do the usual things we do in worship, and we'll include a kids' time, communion, message, offering time, and then at about 30 minutes or so, we would take a break. Kids can go off to Sunday school, and then we adults will stay, do a little music, and dig deeper into the sermon time, be able to ask questions, do a little Bible study together. We're thinking about doing that. So we're practicing it in a little different form here online. We do worship on the weekend, and then Wednesday night we do the second half, what we're calling Grace Forward. And so what we're doing today for our Bible study is we are looking at the sermon that we talked about this past weekend, where Jesus breaks the Sabbath in order to reset our lives. And so I want to read for you the passage of Scripture that Pastor Kathleen preached on, and then we're going to dive deep into it. All right? So here we go. This is from Mark chapter 2, verses 23 through 28. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as they, meaning Jesus and his disciples, made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and he gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." So we're going to dig a little deeper into that passage of Scripture. Before we do, thought you might enjoy this song from your worship band.
Let your kingdom come here. Let your will be done here in us. Jesus, there is no one greater. You alone are Savior. Show the world your love. King of heaven, come down. King of heaven, come down. Let your glory reign, shining like the day. King of heaven, come. King of heaven, rise up. Who could stand against us? You are strong to save in your mighty name. King of heaven, come. We are children of your mercy, rescued for your glory. We cry, Jesus, set our hearts toward you, that every eye would see you lifted high. King of heaven, come down. King of heaven, come down. Let your glory reign, shining like the day. King of heaven, come. King of heaven, rise up. Who can stand against us? You are strong to save in your mighty name. King of
All right, thank you, band. So what we're going to do here for the next few moments is we're going to look at this story where Jesus is doing something he's apparently not supposed to do on the Sabbath day, and how he takes the concept of the Sabbath day and turns it on its head and makes it a new gift for you. So let's start with a little background. There's an author by the name of Judith Shulevitz, and she's written a book called The Sabbath World, Glimpses of a Different Order of Time. And during an interview, she was asked about the Sabbath. And here's what she said. She said, next to the Torah, which is the Hebrew Bible, next to the Torah, the Sabbath is perhaps the greatest innovation or contribution of the Jews to humanity. Now, that's an amazing statement because we're so used to a day off concept, and to think that this was an innovation given to us by the Jewish people. So let me share with you a couple reasons why it is so radical, and this will help us then get into the story a little bit. First of all, the Sabbath day was and still is a radical, counter-cultural innovation. This was a day set aside to rest, and it was given to slaves, to people who were never permitted to rest. They worked 7 days a week, and the only break they got was to sleep for a few hours. And God rescues them from slavery, and one of the first things that God does, he says, I'm going to give you a day off, a day of rest. And it wasn't radical just because it was given to a group of slaves. It was radical because back in those days, still kind of true today, people just didn't take a day off. It's just work, work, work. And God said, I value you enough to give you a full day off. And so it was radical because it was given to a group of slaves to help create a new identity for them. They were no longer slaves. They were free people, and they were free enough to take a day off. It was also a gift that was given to them by God, because God, unlike all the other gods, was not a restless God. God was a God who rested. God created for 6 days, and then God took a day off. And the reason why God could take a day off was because God's identity was not found so much in what God did, but in who God is. And so even God could take a day off and rest. The Sabbath was also radical in terms of hierarchies. So what made this Sabbath unique was that not just the king, not just the religious elite, not just rich people could take a day off. Everybody got a day off. From the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, and even the animals were given a day off. It was that important. So when it came to the Sabbath day, everyone was equal. Everyone was treated as the image of God. No hierarchies. Everyone, in God's eyes, was worthy of a day of rest. And so it was a day that leveled the playing field. It was a day that was meant to rehumanize us. It's also radical in terms of political economics. Economies, by their very nature, are built on the principle, it's never enough. Economies, by principle, are built on the belief that you have to have more, and so you have to work harder to get more. And so in ancient days, and we have some of these references in the stories of Jesus, in ancient days, just because of the way life worked, some people had to work every day just to make ends meet. If they didn't work one day, they didn't get paid, they didn't get to eat. And the Sabbath was an antidote to that, as we'll see in a moment. In our time, we live in a 24/7 world, particularly now where the internet is going all the time, Instagram, Facebook going all the time, where we can, any time, during the day, night, any hour of the day, we can go on and with a click of a button, we can buy stuff, which means we're going to have to work harder. And so the economics of the world is meant to make you busy so that you'll work harder and spend more money. And that's where the Sabbath comes in with this radical gift. And now maybe some of you are familiar with Family Feud, where survey says, well, we'll do a few survey says, only it's Sabbath says, there is enough. The Sabbath says, there is enough. Sabbath says, trust in God's graciousness and providence. Sabbath says, relax and enjoy what you have. Sabbath says, the right to rest is as holy as the right to work. Sabbath says, resting from the everyday makes the everyday far more meaningful. And Sabbath says, reroot yourself in God's faithfulness through rest and through worship. Economies say work harder, work more, buy more, and work more. The Sabbath says life is enough for one day. Take a break, enjoy God's grace, enjoy what God has given to you, and rest. And then finally, the Sabbath was a radical innovation in terms of the essence of humanity. Again, economies say that to be human, we have to work, and we have to work hard. And our economies, if we rest at all, we work so that we can rest. All right, how many of us have on that calendar, before COVID anyway, we have circled our day off, or we have circled when we're going to go on vacation, and we can't wait for that day to come. People start their work on Monday morning, and they are working for Saturday, right? So we work to rest. The Sabbath turns that upside down. And Sabbath says life begins with rest so that we can work. So when God created human beings in Genesis chapter 1, it was the last thing that God did on the sixth day. So that means the very first thing that we as human beings did on our first full day, which was the seventh day, was we rested. And then we went to work. And so the Sabbath takes all of this emphasis on work and says life begins with rest. And it's out of rest that we work, and when we're rested, work becomes meaningful. So that was sort of the concept of how radical the Sabbath was. And so the Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments that God gave to the people of Israel, and the Jews took it very seriously. The Sabbath says don't murder. The 10 commandments say don't murder. They don't commit adultery, and they say don't break the Sabbath. So breaking the Sabbath for the Jews was the same as murdering someone. It was on that scale. It was that important to them. Now, they didn't want to mess it up because this was a holy gift that God had given to them. So the 10 commandments, the commandment says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So now they're asking, well, what does that mean? Can I cook a burger? Can I go to the mall? Can I go online, buy something? Can I watch a football game? What does it mean to keep the Sabbath day holy? And so over time, they began to create one law after another. The things you cannot do on the Sabbath so as to protect the Sabbath day. And finally, they came up with 39 major laws that were created to protect people from breaking the Sabbath. And under those 39 laws were 6 subsets of laws. And so there were dozens and dozens and dozens of things you could not do on the Sabbath, and they got increasingly smaller and smaller, more minutia. So that finally, in the end, the only thing that you could do on the Sabbath was save a life. If there was something life-threatening, you could break the Sabbath. That was it. Nothing else. They told you how far you could walk. They told you how far you could carry your bed mat. You couldn't put a bandage on a finger. All these kinds of things so that you would not break the Sabbath. And today, to this day, our Orthodox Jewish friends are very strict in their understanding of the Sabbath. If you go to Israel, as I've done several times, and you're staying in a hotel, for example, on the Sabbath day, the food that you will eat has already been cooked the day before. And they have what they call Shabbat, which is the Hebrew word for Sabbath elevators. And these Sabbath elevators run automatically. They go from one floor to the next, and they stop for several minutes at each floor so that you don't have to push the button, which would be working on the Sabbath. And so for those of us who are not Jewish people, when we go to Israel and it's the Sabbath day, we're warned, don't get on the Shabbat elevator, especially if you're on the top floor. It'll take you all day to get there because it'll just go slowly, all right? So the Gentiles, we could press buttons, but the Orthodox Jews can't. That's how important the Sabbath was to them. And that gives you a sense then of what was happening in the story of Jesus. So before we look at the story of Jesus, let me just say here that it's easy to mock the Jews with how small the Sabbath became for them. But for them, in making the Sabbath small, they were making it big. They were really trying to honor this great gift that God had given to them. They had been slaves. They'd never had a day off before. And God said, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. It is a sacred day. And so they wanted to figure out to the best of their ability how to do that. And so all these laws were created out of a good place. They wanted to protect the Sabbath day. But in the end, it started to harm the Sabbath day. The Sabbath got lost in the weeds. So that sets up the context. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, look, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? So what were they doing that wasn't lawful? They were picking the heads of grain. Now that in itself wasn't unlawful, because according to Jewish law, Deuteronomy 23:25, if you're walking through a neighbor's grain field, you can pick the heads of grain. Here's what it says. If you go into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the ears with your hands, but you shall not put a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain. All right? So one of the reasons for this, to be able to eat the grain from your neighbors, is to say, we're in this together. We're a community. We share. But you don't go in this sickle and harvest all his grain. You can just pluck a little snack. That's okay. But they were plucking this snack on the Sabbath day, and there was a law against that. In those 39 things I mentioned that you can't do on the Sabbath, and then all the subsets, among them were reaping, threshing, winnowing, and preparing a meal. So they were reaping grain. They were breaking the Sabbath by plucking that grain off of the heads of the grain off of the heads. Now again, any other day they could do that. They couldn't do it on the Sabbath day. And so Jesus and his disciples were breaking the Sabbath day. And I think Jesus knew it, right? As Kathleen said in the sermon, he was educated. He knew Jewish law. So Jesus said to these Pharisees, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and he gave some to his companions. David, in the story that Jesus references, is running from King Saul. King Saul wants to kill him. And David and his small band of men are starving. They need food to eat. And so they ate what's called the bread of the presence. Here's what the bread of the presence was. Number one, it was made of fine flour. It was baked in 12 loaves, one loaf for each of the 12 tribes. It was arranged in 2 piles of 6. It was covered in frankincense, so it had to have an interesting taste to it, right? It's like eating bread with perfume on it. It was put on a table of pure gold, and it served as a memorial and an offering to the Lord. This was food that was made specifically as an offering to God. And the bread could only be eaten by law by Aaron, who was the priest, and his sons. And so this bread was set out every Sabbath day as a holy gift, and then could only be eaten by the high priest. David needed to eat. And the only food available to him was this food on the altar set aside for God that only the high priest should eat. And yet the high priest at that time saw that the needs that David and his men had superseded the law. And it was more important for them to eat than to keep that one stipulation of the law. So Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind and not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So Jesus here is making at least a couple points. First of all, the Sabbath was given as a gift by God to serve us, to serve humanity. It is not a taskmaster for us to serve. It's a gift that's given to us to refresh us, to revital us, to make us more human. We simply cannot go 24/7. We're not built for that. We burn out from that. This is a gift that God has given to us to help us catch our breath and to rehumanize ourselves. Secondly, Jesus is saying that he's Lord of the Sabbath, that he's the one who fulfills the Sabbath, that he's the one who restores the Sabbath to its radical power. In Jesus, we find Sabbath rest. In Jesus, we find that new humanness. We find ourselves revitalized. We find ourselves remade and reborn. So the problem in Jesus' day was that the rules were strangling the life out of the Sabbath. The problem in our day is that we ignore the Sabbath and we're strangling life out of ourselves. Our problem is not putting too many rules in place for the Sabbath. Our problem is that we've bought into economics and it's robbing us of life. And so Jesus has an invitation for us. And his invitation is to rediscover the radical power of the Sabbath. And that starts with Jesus himself. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Let me read that same verse from a different translation, the Message. "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." All right, that's a little bit about the text that we looked at from worship. And when we get together next Wednesday, we're going to dig deeper into the story of the man with the withered hand. I want to remind you what's coming up now. Tomorrow night, Thursday night, is going to be time to sing with Tony and Lisa. And that's at 6 o'clock. On Friday, Pastor Kathleen leads our prayer time, does Faith 5 with her family. And then Saturday, we'll be back to worship again, and we'll be looking at the next story in the life of Jesus, and that's the story of Jesus and the man with the withered hand, and how he rehumanizes that man, and through us, rehumanizes the world. I hope you join us for that. May God bless you and keep you. Wear your mask. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.